Hi, Tim. Good morning.
Morning, Seshu. We got people just start coming in. Hey, did you get your so there was some action items that they had that came out of the RX scoping meeting. Did you guys get those resolved?
No. The action item was it was not nothing to do with us, but it was more like the pointers were coming on the generic way for NIFIO. It was the entire NIFIO which will actually have impact on that. So we had to adopt it when it comes. We had to adapt it, right? That is what the action item was from Wim. If you remember, he was talking about the written part, and my reply to that was it is actually an issue in the NIFIO, not just for our use case. And Wim said yes, that is true. And
Yeah, but
right now,
I think there was some clarifications you guys need to make, right? Like I got them bolded here, right?
what is it regarding?
Uses nothing new from the NEPIO enablers. Then
Right. That I clarified. That's true. Yes.
yeah, and then
So
we're going to
these all things we clarified, right? These all things we clarified.
all
Wim's thing we all clarified.
have been or need to be in the use case.
It's already done. It's done.
Okay,
And we have clarified it in that meeting where we drew a separate NEFIO based thing, right? NEFIO based diagram. So in that, these issues have been clarified.
Okay,
these
all right.
have been clarified.
That's what I wanted to make sure. Right. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. We're gonna let everyone.
So these you got captured these comments from Wim's comments on the PPT, isn't it?
Yeah, this is on the RX meeting, right? This is what was captured in the RX meeting. So I would just
that those things we have clarified in the same meeting. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that they are also clarified in the actual use case or the artifacts.
Right.
Right.
The no objection thing is actually come after these things. And one note we had add was this one, that is use of mentioned if your KPT will be used. That is already done. The first one is done. Timelines is already. This is done. First one is done. Second one is done. Use case nothing new to be enabled. That's done. Use of Helm charts in NEFIO is not needed. KPT will be used. That is done. Issue will be security feedback. This is actually one which I said this open point is something which is there in NEFIO. It's already in NEFIO, nothing to do with this use case specific. So we said we will be taking it when it's ready. We'll be adopting it when it's ready in NEFIO.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. I just wanted to make sure you guys were your stuff clear. Okay. So guys, we're going to give everyone about 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we'll get started with the Administrivia.
Hey, hi guys.
Hey. So I have to figure out who's doing the cluster stuff. So all right. So let's do this. Let's actually get started, and that way, as people finally can come in, we'll get to these points. So this is the February 7th meeting for the ORAN. We currently have on the agenda, we have approval of previous minutes. We have discussing some use cases that we have not agreed to yet to go to scoping for RX. And so I'd like to get those across if they're ready. So I'll need to have people that are working on those let me know if they're ready to go or not. And then if not, do a presentation to see if maybe there's some work that we need to do. So there's 3 of them that are still outstanding. We did have some use cases that did go to the scoping that actually had that were agreed to go forward. By the way, these are the 2 use cases, and so I just wanted to make sure. I want to circle back. That's what I was doing with Seishu. I wanted to circle back and make sure that we have all the action items that came out of that scoping meeting addressed. So we'll do that, and then finally, Anders has a cluster registration. Use case that he wanted to discuss. It's not necessarily ORAN related, but it has some potential impact. To give you guys some notes just up front, there is the reconfigure NF user story that we agreed to. That's in the scoping queue. We didn't get to it on Friday, so I expect that this Friday's scoping queue will probably get to that. So the group that's working on that, Sagar, your team over there, I think will get to you guys this time, hopefully. Okay. All right. So does anyone else have anything else that they want to discuss today? See nothing in the chat. I don't see hand raises. So the first action item is we have our last meeting minutes from January 31st that need approval. I would ask, does anyone have any objections to the approval of these minutes? Again, I would remind the group that you're more than welcome to edit those minutes as they come, if I've interpreted them incorrectly. I don't see any objections, so I'm going to mark these as approved. Okay. So the next one is this group of 3 user stories that we currently have. Are the people that are working on that Alexis, Bala? Anyone else working on these 3 use cases?
I have an update. I spoke with Bala on this, and since last week Bala was busy with the release guidance and release meeting, he could not join it. But otherwise, he wanted to bring it up to the architecture discussion and get the approval done. So Bala is working on it. That's my understanding. And this week, perhaps he'll be trying to get it up to the architecture meeting.
All right. So these things still aren't ready. Then, what we're saying, right?
They are ready. But since Bala was not, was busy with the release meeting, he could not actually present them in the last meeting. But this week we will present it. That's the understanding which I have with Bala.
In the RX meeting or here? I'm missing.
In the RX meeting. In the RX meeting.
So again, I think the process we've been going through, guys, is that we want to make sure that everything is clear here before we give it to the RX meeting, right?
I'll do one thing. Then I'll pass this message to Bala. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'll take the baton that I'll pass this to Bala, and then we will get back to you on this 3 use cases. Okay.
Okay.
Sure. I'll take an action on this. Yeah.
Need to determine if these are agreed to RX scoping. All right. And the reason why I want to do that is because not everyone is. I just want to make sure that the ORAN group that have the various pieces of this all look at this and say, yeah, okay, I think we've got things covered, right? And that's why we kind of go through this process of agreeing to them here before we move them to the RX scoping, right? Okay. And there's some transparency involved with that. I don't want to just start shoving stuff into RX scoping without the group here having a chance to see it and agree to it. Okay. All right. So from the RX scoping meeting, then this might be a short meeting. Where there was again this RX scoping meeting that was there, and there was we had these discussions, and we had both for the NF orchestration using. There was some discussion points that they had in the meeting that really we had to take into account, either modifying our use cases or explaining to the group, right? And so what I did is my best is I tried to hold these, put them in bold, these action points, right? And if I understand it correctly, Seshu and I were having this discussion right before the meeting. For the NF orchestration using the SMO, we believe that everything is ready to go. We're using these kept packages. There's nothing new in the Nepio enablers. OSC is expected to complete their part of the work in May for integration. So it looks like the timing is correct. The only big issue that is still an unknown, but that's more of a Nepio issue, is the security of the workload cluster to management cluster feedback. But that's something that they now know that they need to take care of. We'll utilize it in this use case if it's necessary. But it looks like everything from here is taken care of.
Sorry, Tim. If it's necessary is one part, of course. If it is necessary, but when it's ready.
I'm sorry. Did I say is it? I meant when it's ready. Sorry.
When it's ready, right. It's not that it's not necessary. When it's ready, we'll adapt it because
you're
not making any change.
You're absolutely correct. Yeah. Sorry,
just want to make sure that goes in that form.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because we can't use it until it's ready, right? So yes.
Right. Exactly. Right.
All right. So that was this one. So, but Naaman, I think you also had your without an SMO. So you provided the overview.
Just I captured one comment, Tim.
Yeah.
So instead of calling it security of the feedback, it's more the feedback loop, having the feedback loop in a secure manner.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's what it is.
Issue. So help me on. So what you want to do is say what? The feedback loop.
Yeah, having a secure feedback loop, can say that way.
Having
Having a
okay.
Yeah.
Just a second. Okay.
Yeah,
Having a secure feedback loop.
Yeah.
Loop is still open issue. When ready, this mechanism, right,
Yeah.
will be incorporated in the use case, right?
Let's say to be incorporated, not say will be, because we don't know what time frame it will be ready. So if it's ready by the R3, we'll
Is
take it. If
expected
it's not,
to be incorporated.
yeah, based on the availability. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Incorporated. Thank God for spell check. Based on and timing and release timing. Get it if we have time to get it, is what we're saying, right? Okay. All right. So SMO, without an SMO, so there was a couple issues that were still there. Have you determined where you're putting your near real-time RIC? Have you created a deployment for where you put in the near real-time RIC? Have you adopted that, Sagar?
Uh,
Damon?
yeah. So basically, like you mentioned also, the response time should be less than 1 second. But at the same time, to simulate like E2 sitting in the edge, and then that E2 is connecting to a different cluster, which can be again in the edge, uh, or can be in regional. But yeah, definitely, what we are looking at is they should be in different clusters. That should be the main like point of discussion, rather than whether it will be on edge or in at the regional cloud. Uh, yeah, so given that the response time, or basically the latency, should be less than 1 second, we can, I think, keep in two different clusters, be it
Okay.
to both the clusters in edge or in region. Yeah.
So Sagar, Naaman, look,
Yeah.
within the document itself,
Yeah.
or your component architectures, you should have a deployment. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you should have a
Yeah.
deployment architecture there that should
Okay.
show where the non-real-time RIC and where the XApp. I'm going to assume they're both in the same cluster, but maybe not. But you need to show which cluster they're going to go in.
Okay.
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 Because it gets
Got
into
it.
some addressing and everything else. Okay. So that needs to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
well
It will
depicted
be,
in the use
yeah,
case.
clear. Yeah. It will be clear from that. Yeah. Yeah. I got it.
Okay.
Got it.
So that's still open for
Also,
you.
yeah, one more thing, Tim. So like we decided in this meeting itself, like I think 2-3 weeks back, when I presented the user story, that we'll move and accept deployment into a different user story. So even though like the whole deployment, development, and the flow looks similar, but yeah, uh, the details like CR changes, like the config CR related to XApp will be different. So I've created a different user story. Uh, so if we can discuss that also, or we can put it in one of the as one of the items to be discussed.
Where's that at here?
Okay, so I think I've not added it here, but I
Okay.
have the link as of now. I think I created in my
All right.
local drive. But yeah,
Okay. Do me a favor, add it here. Okay.
okay.
And I'll put a link to it, and we'll discuss it on next Wednesday. If we have time this week, we'll
Yeah,
discuss
sure,
it,
sure.
right? Okay, but if not, I'll make sure it's on the list for next week. Okay.
Sure, sure. Yeah.
All right.
Great, great. Yeah, thanks.
So here, what we're still saying is still needs to incorporate the deployment architecture, right?
Yeah.
For where the Rick will reside. Okay. Then there was also another note that said there's questions about how to stitch together the E2.
I
Right.
think this is the same thing, right?
Same
Between
thing.
edge and yeah, region.
Okay.
So
All right. With
uh,
with E2 reasons, with E2 considerations. Okay, that's fine.
yeah.
And then it's a business benefit. I'm not worried about that. Near real time, maybe more than one actor pod and its integration. So you need to get a hold of Sabash and Varad, I think, and talk about particularly where you're going to deploy it, how you're going to work within, and it may be very well future. We might not have to worry about it for release 3, but if you're going to do SA, any type of the service assurance integration for release 3, which I don't think we're doing, right? So this might be just a future note. I don't think it's necessary for release 3, unless you're doing the
Uh,
integration. Are you guys doing
mhm.
SA integration? I didn't see it in use case.
Yeah, so basically, we can have actor pod as one near arteric or even XAP.
Right, but we
So yeah,
can have, if we're going to do for release 3 are two different words, two different
yeah, yeah.
nodes.
So yeah, once essay is ready, then we can think of it. So
All right,
as of
so
now, it's still in discussion phase. Yeah,
all right, handle it as SA works. Okay, all right, that
yeah,
works for me too.
yeah.
So, sorry if I'm being a bit forceful, but I'm just trying to make sure that all the ducks are in order. That when we say, okay, we're not going to miss anything that we're talking about that we said we wanted to do for release 3.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
I
and
got
for this one, Seshu, what we're saying is all the items have been addressed, right? Seshu,
Sorry, I was talking on mute. Yes.
addressed all outstanding issues. RX scope have been addressed.
I have one more update, team, as
Yeah.
a next step to it. Yeah.
Yep.
So we discussed, me, Ravi, Sagar, and Vishal from Capgemini, we discussed about the next step for this story. And one good news is that we could find resources to help this. Okay. Sagar will be helping us on the OI side. Ravi will be helping us with the logistics and also the entire thing from the administration side of this, so that we can present it to different, because we are coming from different time zones. So the meetings can be some odd times for people in India and abroad. So that's the thing which Ravi will be helping us with. And I will be the architect for this, and I'll be taking the lead for the FOCOM and the OSC part. That's actually coming from there. And Vishal will be the guy who will be helping us on the implementation for the NFO part. Okay. So we have decided to have this major growth, I would say top level. And we are also looking at other partners who can actually come together and help us. Also Bala, when I discussed with Bala, he also showed some interest in this to have these integrations done. That's a good news for us that we have even found out the helping hands to come forward and help us to have this implemented. That's the next step. Now, what we'll do is we will start to work on creating stories into this. Epics, to start with epics, of course. Epics and stories will be created as the next step, and all the experts in the community will be will be consulted to make sure that we give the best of it. And also the stories will be created in the OSC side to start with, as I said, so that we have the bridge between both these communities, including the OI, of course. All the three communities actually can go hand in hand. That's the current thing which we just discussed today morning,
So
India time. I'm saying.
Are we saying beyond release 3? Is this beyond release 3 that we're discussing?
No. We will first do release 3, and there'll be 2 releases, right? One is on the release 3 from Nefio side, and then the J release, which is actually happening on the OSC side. We are only talking about this current release. So we'll start with the epics right now. If anything in the epic requires to break down, that is actually what we will discuss, and we will also present it here. Okay.
All right. So if I understand this correctly, then what you're saying is part of the development
Yes.
of the use case that's there that we talked about of the use case.
Yeah.
OSC has started identifying the epics and user.
We will do it both the places. Not just OSC. I'm saying we'll do it both the places, OSC as well as Nepio, and then we will also provide you the details as we progress with the implementation of that.
So you're going to do them with both places, right?
We're going to do what? Sorry, come again.
I guess I'm trying to figure out how you're doing this. So we have, I understand you've got OEI and you've got Nepio and you've got OSC. You're going to identify some tasks. You call them epics and user stories. You're going to identify some tasks that you need for development, right?
Yeah.
And so you're going to document those either in both in OSC as well as within the Nepio community, as well as the OAI community for their own individual development purposes.
Yeah.
But you're going to present those here so that people can see what tasks need to be done. Is that that the interpretation? Because I think that's what
right. That's right. That's right.
Okay.
So we will also do the same in other communities too as well. Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
Nepio and OAI community.
Ravi, Sagar, you want to chime in anything?
Yeah, sorry, I was out just dropping off my child. So I think what we discussed, I would just say that in Nepio probably we might want to participate in the cadence with SIG 2 also, where the epics are
that's where it should be, right? So you should be.
Yeah, it will be. We have identified the people who will also have the representation in cadence 2 coming from Capgemini. They're already part of the release 2. Sorry, SIG 2, I would say. So that also is place where we'll actually have these discussions further.
Yeah, but I think that's where you have to do it first, right? Because now it's in the SIG 2 realm. Certainly from the Nepio perspective, you're going to need the SIG 2 aspects of it, right? So it's going to be on their tasking board. Robbie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's where it belongs.
Exactly. I think that's where, that's what we were discussing yesterday. And Seishu has already been discussing with, he's also in, has been syncing up on some other topics on the working group too. So I did, he'll be syncing up on that, how they could participate in those epics and, sync up with what's going on the OSC and so on.
Okay, so, but that's my expectation. I don't think you need to bring SIG automation stuff necessarily back here unless you think that it's of use to the community here, right?
Oh, sure.
So I don't want to put an unnecessary burden on you. My point, unless you feel that there's a need for the the use case stuff to be notified. Okay.
Sure, makes sense. We anyways will be targeting SIG 2. That's the whole point. As Ravi rightly chimed in. And also the other part to it, we are also looking at the integration large scale. So that part of it, we'll get back as necessary here. Otherwise, we'll handle it in SIG 2 and the corresponding or respective the open source projects also.
Yeah, but if there's new use cases that are coming out, right, that you want to do, right, but then we're going to need to bring those up. Those need to be identified and brought up through the network architecture this group here.
Yeah.
That way we can vet it out. So because some of the stuff that Santa and Karen Kellyan, sorry, forgot the gentleman's name, but the TSC and that Santa wants to try to do is put some more business, understand the business benefits, right? So for what we're doing, we got to go look at the next set of use cases as we try to fill out this crawl, walk, run. We got stuff that we have to do. We got stuff that we want to try to show to do, and then be running down the path. But we want to start trying to show some business benefit of using Nepio to deploy your RAN and the NFs and the RAN, right? So my point is that any use cases that we've done, like what we've done today, POCs that we want to try to do. We need to make sure we bring that back through this group here, right? So we can give it into the broader context for Nephew. Okay, make sense?
Sure. Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. All right.
And as you rightly said, I mean, the detail table is always in detail. So as we go details to it, I'm sure we'll be finding out some other things. As and when we find it, we'll be getting back to you. Sure.
Okay. Cool. All right. So that's those two. So now we're on to the cluster registration. Anders, is this something that you wanted to present?
Yeah, sure. Hear me?
Yeah. So how much time do you think you're going to need?
10 minutes, maybe. I don't know how much discussion there is.
Okay. Well, I'm open. I'll give you up to 20 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, man.
If I get 500 minutes, I'm probably happy.
Okay.
So I steal the share.
I'm here to make you happy. Go ahead.
Yeah. That means we have a lot of discussion. That's probably good. Now let's see where things went. So I hope you can see something. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Not yet.
Don't tell me it's going to behave today again. Oh, maybe.
Now we see it.
Yep. Sorry, I'm not used to Zoom. We're a Teams company, so I'm still getting used to this. So what we try to do is define a user story for a cluster registration process to be able for Nephew to work with workload clusters that are managed by somebody else. Currently, we assume that workload clusters that we in Nephew are managed by Nephew. But we believe there will be many scenarios, at least in the beginning, where this is not true, where organizations have separate organizations for managing infrastructure and network functions, for example. And the idea basically is to leverage the same artifacts that we use when Nephew creates clusters and maintain the resources for those clusters. But instead of a cluster creation process filling that information in, having a registration filling in the same records, so that we that way have a compatibility with the create cluster use case that we had earlier on the agenda, and the way that works. And then with the registered cluster, more or less. And we think this is, of course, something that we need to support at scale. There will be thousands of clusters, so we need batched mechanisms, so to say. And from an ORAN perspective, I mean, this is not an ORAN use case, at least not yet. But it is related to the FOCOM function overall. It could be considered an extension of it. And that's the connection to this group, basically, that we are staying in sync with the cluster creation and cluster lifecycle management use cases. So we believe it needed by operators and cost providers. Personas would be network designers and network operators and infra providers. There's a large scalability. It's centered the same for creating and managing clusters. As I said, we probably want a common cluster record for both that we use for managing the clusters in Nephew. We need to be able to update them, and so on. And we have for exit, we have a target wrapper structure for workload clusters in Nephew, and secrets management solution for the clusters. So we have access, we'll be able to handle access to the clusters, workload clusters. And core functional requirements would be to be able to add clusters with namespaces so on in bulk. Check store cluster state, query clusters, update clusters, and eventually remove them. And we think this is at least multiple thousands in a batch. Then we did and this may be hopefully where it gets a bit more interesting. First, some things are not in scope. We need to be able to distinguish regulated clusters from clusters that are created and managed by Nephew, so that we don't try to manage a cluster managed by somebody else. So there need to be some impact to the cluster CRDs or whatever cluster structure we have that we can distinguish between the two. Referring to the create cluster as a base for understanding how we want a workload cluster to work and what we want to be configured there, and we want to stay aligned to that so that we don't deviate with the registration and prerequisites. I've tried to do that, the sequence below. And basically, then I tried to add a component architecture. We are still working on this, I would say. So there's more to do for more use cases. But the essentials of it is that we based on the create cluster use case. And now I start reading my own text, but essentially register, replicate the create, but the cluster is defined and how the cluster is defined, so that we can do the registration. And we assume that the workload cluster that we have registered is identical to if we would have created it. So we place that requirement on whoever is actually creating the cluster to match our requirements to be able to use it as an Nephew workload cluster. So I've assumed that we are getting the same information that we would get out of a create cluster use case in the response as input on the request. So essentially a cluster ID and an endpoint. And then I have intentionally left out some details so to leave room for how the actual implementation of cluster looks like. And then this is a sequence that I tried to illustrate a little bit our thinking. This far, this still evolves. So that's why we ask for feedback. Believe we have a Nephew user. We have a workload cluster, but we're actually not interacting with it in this use story. But I have placed requirements on what we expect from it. So this is the workload cluster that gets registered. We believe there is some kind of cluster registration service that receives the request. That essentially is a batch interface, since we will need to be able to handle large logs batch that will take some time and long running requests. We don't believe this is a request response interface. So we essentially evaluate batch input and either accept or reject. If we accept, we return a batch ID. Then we create the cluster jobs that will do the heavy lifting of for each cluster. And we leverage the ports to update our gits, basically. After each job then persists its result as a for provide our capability to give status. I'll get to that in a few seconds. And the idea of when this use case is finished, then we have the cluster available to the NFO for NF deployments. We have the DMS endpoint and use credentials available to the NFO. And since we do a batch kind of job, the reason I want to return a batch ID is so that we can actually get the status of batch at any given point to the user. I think this is as far as we have come. There's some more of this to be added. Any questions, comments, feedback?
So is there any feedback? Do we have hands raised or?
I just had one question.
Yes.
Because you know, again, I'm driving here. I can't see the whole content. But just to clarify this, we call it as DMS, but then you also mentioned it's an external cluster. So when for me DMS means it's part of the OCloud, right? So
yes,
can you clarify if it's external cluster, then why is it a DMS?
That's actually a good point. I mean, it is a Kubernetes cluster with limited access, matching the DMS, the requirements we have on the DMS. That's the only relation to the DMS, basically. And that we want to be able to use it through the NFO. So the NFO has relation to this cluster as it would have to DMS. Other than that, it's Kubernetes. So
generally, all the DMS discovery gets it happens through your O2 IMS. Is this a use case again within ORAN, or is this like something?
No, it is not, at least not yet an ORAN use case. At least not, I cannot find the use case. It's related to, its only relation to ORAN today is that we're working towards some cluster that we want to use as a DMS. That I would say is the point of contact with ORAN today. And then the other question is if ORAN needs this use case, and that can be discussed and argued. It may be something that should be proposed to ORAN as a use case, but that might also be a very long discussion. I'm not sure that the ORAN I see is would recognize this as a use case today, but I may be wrong.
So
okay.
I did have my hand raised, right?
Oh,
So,
okay. Sorry, I can't see hand.
No, that's okay. So I'm going to just ask. So there's a question here of, you know, again, what is the responsibility of NFO and FOCOM versus IMS and DMS? So I know that the O2 IMS interface includes both the ability to create a cluster as well as provide the provisioning information you need for a DMS. Okay, so you can assign a DMS to a cluster, that type of thing, right? Gets a location. Now, what I think what you're asking for, so I didn't quite understand why we need to have, and it may be because there's not ORAN. I, I'm open to that, right? But I don't understand what the value is that for registering a cluster within Nepio. And I'm going to assume at this point it's the IMS keeping track of the clusters that it created. There may be some value in that, right? I can see that because you have a cluster record. I assume that the IMS is going to have a cluster record and it's going to expose that cluster record across the IMS interface, right? So certainly internal, I think he's got to keep track of what his clusters that he's created, right? And what associations and statuses are there. So I think it's valuable there. So I'm trying to figure out why you think that it goes above what information needs to be exposed that's necessary that the NFO will need, why the NFO would need any particular information that you're talking about in the cluster.
I don't think the NFO needs any more information than that cluster record. It shouldn't. And I'm actually hoping it doesn't. And I hope this is another way to create that cluster record when the IMS, the Nepio IMS, is not the one that creates it and manages the cluster.
Okay, so that's an important distinction. So I would assume that if there is no IMS, right? What you're doing is you're saying the Nepio, I'm going to say the user, right, is effectively doing the FOCOM / IMS / NFO function, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Then how it's done. They may have another system for doing all those, but I have modeled it as a user.
Okay. Stefan, I think you have your hand raised.
Yeah. Perhaps I should clarify, Anders, a comment here. I think you have it in the text. So when you say Nepio management cluster here, it related to the other use case we have for creation of cluster, where we show that we have like one management cluster on the SMO level, and then one management cluster on the IMS level. This is the SMO Nepio management cluster we are talking about here, right? Because basically in this use case, there we assume that here we would like the SMO Nepio management cluster to be able to provision workloads in a cluster that has not been managed by a standardized IMS. It has been standardized in some other way, arbitrary way. So I don't assume anything about that there is any IMS existing at all in this use case.
Exactly. And that might actually be, I don't know, Tim, if you assume that the cluster record was on the IMS side or on the SMO side. I assume that
I assume that this management cluster that you're talking about here is actually on the IMS side, the IMS management cluster. Because the SMO, right, the FOCOM, or any FOCOM, I'm going to say FOCOM, I don't really care how that works. I do care, but right now I'm not worried about it. That he should be able to retrieve the cluster information, the information about a cluster. So he creates it, right, and he gets a cluster ID that comes back, but he can use that cluster ID and query the IMS to get some cluster information. Right?
But the thinking here was that we needed a use case for supporting managing of clusters when you don't have an IMS. You have an SMO implemented with
I'm okay. Well,
yeah.
hold it.
Yeah.
You don't have an SMO without an IMS, right? Okay. But what you're saying is that you might have an orchestration system, right? That does not have, that incorporates the functions of the IMS and the ORAN functions that would be provided by the IMS and the NFO and the and I don't know, maybe the DMS as well. I don't know. But and I'm okay with that, right? But we have to be very clear that in the ORAN case, the exposure, remember, because ORAN's going to deal with, O clouds that'll be Nepio, have the Nepio enablers. They're going to deal with O clouds that are Kubernetes that don't have Nepio neighbor. They're going to deal with O clouds that are, ETSI NFV based, right? That are based upon some other technology, right?
Exactly.
And so what it looks like up in ORAN is that the IMS provides a cluster identifier. It will provide what information that you need about the cluster itself by the ID. So the IMS should be able to provide that as well. So if you need to know the health of the cluster, you need to know the details of the cluster, like what is the DMS that's responsible for that cluster. That should all be gotten through the IMS interface, right?
So let me ask a question.
Now, if the Nepio enablers for that is this stuff that you have on the screen, then that just means that our IMS adaptation would have to use the management cluster that's part of the IMS, right? That stores this stuff.
I'm not sure yet.
Am I missing something?
No, I'm not sure yet. That's why I wanted to ask a question. So if NFO wants information about the cluster, does it ask IMS or does it ask FOCOM?
Right now, I'm sorry, but right now the way that the flows work, and correct me if I'm wrong, Seishu, NFO has to ask FOCOM. The NFO does not ask the IMS right now. That's
exactly because
it's weird. It's weird, but go ahead.
Tim, in the OSC part, we don't have inventory, so we are depending on the IMS DB because that's the only place where we will be able to store the cluster information. But once we have the inventory of FOCOM, we'll be extending it further. But right now, it is IMS DB which is what is created. Having said that, we do have a subscription model which is actually there as part of standard. The subscription model is the thing which when you subscribe on any change on the cluster information, right, that the entire cloud, IMS is going to give you a notification whenever there's a new change in the cluster that you have added or deleted any modification, or it will give the notification to that. So there are two ways. One, if you
but the IMS endpoint, when the IMS registers, it only registers with one endpoint. That's the FOCOM endpoint.
That's right? True.
So that's the only thing I can get it through. That's my point. Is that now the FOCOM?
No, I agree.
Hey man, you can subscribe to clusters, but you subscribe to clusters through me, right?
So, yes, that is how the logical of it is. But what we are trying to say is because there's no inventory where FOCOM and NFO can talk to each other, we are using the query API.
Oh yeah. Sure.
Yeah. That I'm saying is a temporary solution. Yeah. I'm saying about what we are doing because there is no inventory in the SMO space. Right now, to fetch the information from the IMS DB, we are doing a direct query. That is right now because we don't have inventory. Once we have the inventory in the FOCOM, or sorry, in the SMO, right, in the SMO space and in the entire FOCOM and inventory that can be changed, that can be shared across, then we don't need that interface. Exactly. Hope it clarifies.
So yeah, that's the current implementation. I understand. So earlier today, before I made last changes here, the cluster registration service here, I was actually having as FOCOM. Does that make more sense to you, Tim?
So again, FOCOM will create, and I think Alok's here, right? He might help, but FOCOM will create a cluster, right? Just create a cluster, and it's just going to say it has a template. It's going to say, hey, create me a mid-size edge cluster, right? That's what he's going to tell the IMS. That's the way that the group is looking to do it right now. Then there's a recipe within the IMS to create a mid-size edge cluster, right? And he does that. He gives them the site where he wants it located. And so that's an intent, right? And so the IMS then executes on that intent and then tries to reconcile to that intent, right? And then provides the cluster identifier back, or the FOCOM gives the cluster identifier. I'd have to go look at this case. But either way, there's an identifier that goes there. You can query the IMS. The FOCOM can query the IMS, just as Seishu says. It says, hey, tell me about the cluster. Is it healthy? Is it what's going on with it? Give me some information. Now, or it can be part of an inventory as well. It can be an inventory for the cluster as well, right? That Seishu doesn't have yet. Okay, so the actual registration of a cluster is an artifact of the crate of the OCloud cluster, is my point. It's not something that's not a separate action that would be performed by FOCOM. It's an artifact of the IMS creating the cluster. That's what I believe is going to happen, but maybe a lot.
I kind of agree with that in the case where Nephew creates the cluster.
Where, I don't know, Nephew creates the cluster, where the IMS creates the cluster, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Stefan, Ravi, and Alok has your. So I'm not quite sure. So Stefan, I think you're next, unless your hand was.
Okay. I just wanted to check one thing you mentioned, Tim, related to this, whether we have an OCloud or not. The way I see it myself, at least, is that on the SMO level, the role there is like in FOCOM and NFO to federate across like multiple OClouds, like southbound. I mean, you could not just have one, you could have multiple. And there I see that it is quite possible that you could have an SMO, like an ORAN compliant SMO, that has integrated towards one OCloud with O2 IMS, and there everything is according to the standards. But then you have another like OCloud or cloud infrastructure where you not yet have an O2 IMS compliant API, or you don't have something that allows you to create clusters in that infrastructure. That, I think, still is a valid use case where you then in some other way would need to create those clusters in that infrastructure and then register them in the SMO. I don't think it is valid in that case to register them in another IMS on behalf of this OCloud that doesn't have any IMS. It should just be registered directly in the SMO.
Yeah, sure. But what I'm saying is that at that point, when you're talking about it, that the orchestration system, right now, I'm not going to use the word SMO, right? Because we're outside the ORAN, right? That orchestration system, the infrastructure manager that's there, the FOCOM, is also acting as the IMS for that designated cloud, right? In that case, the management cluster that you're talking about, the Nepio management cluster, but there's still an action. There's a crate of the cluster, and then there's the registration of the cluster that you're talking about. So the crate of so it's not the register from the end user, which might be a service orchestration.
But I wouldn't say that it is acting as an IMS there. It would be very confusing because then suddenly that would supposedly then expose an O2 IMS API.
I said the functionality.
I cannot.
All right.
But that is where we are coming at here, right? That essentially this is like expose or preparing something on the SMO side so that like you still have the clusters there. You can work with them the same way as if they would have been created via FOCOM. So you have all the endpoint information, the credentials, everything is available. The Git repo has been provisioned in the the SMO management cluster. All those things, all those tasks needs to be done still with this registration procedure.
Okay, but I'm just okay. But all I'm saying is that when you're talking about an ORAN one, you have to honor the O2 IMS. And in this case, the cluster is encapsulated within there. If you don't have an IMS, an OCloud, right? I'm going to say an OCloud. You have a Z cloud, right? Then your FOCOM can do whatever it wants to do, right? But I think at that point, the FOCOM is still the end user is not saying register a batch of these clusters. The end user is probably telling FOCOM to say, hey, create me, maybe saying something like create me a cluster, create me a cluster at these particular sites with this particular type of characteristics, right? So I again, there's an interface to FOCOM. Then the FOCOM has an adaptation. One would be an O2 IMS adaptation, right? The other would be a process flow that would deal with a Y cloud or a Z cloud, right? Instead of an O cloud.
Okay.
Yeah, but that is yet another possible
That's
case.
another use
But
case.
that would still be asking Focom to create something then and do have some adaptation towards like a C cloud or so. But here we even talk about the case we don't even have that. We purely want to register the information for the NFO to work.
Yeah, but I'm saying the northbound of the NFO, for the NFO to work, that northbound of the NFO is a service-based interface that's going to have, I mean, even if you're just saying you have anywhere near a compliant SMO, right? The NFO has a certain service interface, and I'm assuming that that service interface is going to be, I need to create a cluster with these characteristics at these sites.
But okay, Tim, you're assuming that there is a access between the Focom and this IMS that owns these clusters, and we're saying in this use case.
No, I'm saying even in this use case, the service that is exposed by Focom, right? The service that is exposed by Focom to create a cluster would not be register batch of KA clusters. It would be create a batch of clusters. And then on these sites, and then he goes, oh, I got this site, I'm going to have to use, this procedure, right? Which is maybe register a batch of KA clusters. Not saying that doesn't exist. I'm saying that the northbound is going to be not register a batch of KA clusters.
The thinking here is that create shall not be used at all. I mean, the northbound would only create clusters if the clusters are missing. I mean, here what we would like to do is that preempt that, like say we register a batch of existing clusters into the SMO, so that like the northbound can query and find that, okay, there is already a cluster there. I'm not creating a cluster on demand for some new. You have an existing cluster available, and then you use that one for your deployment. Yeah.
Okay. So that's a little bit different animal. Now you're saying I need to. At that point, you're saying if this is only saying that the cluster already exists, and all I'm doing is making this cluster known to the SMO, completely different use case, guys. Okay.
That is what we're after here.
Sorry, I was taking the template and actually building it based upon the infrastructure. You're saying it's all there.
Yeah. I'm saying it's all there.
Okay.
And we can't create them. But it was an interesting discussion, because another way to model this would, of course, be that we can create clusters towards this unknown infrastructure, model the infrastructure as an IMS that simply registers.
Yeah, and so the IMS is the way that's done, by the way, in the IMS is that there's an IMS inventory notification in a query, right? So you can query the IMS. You're saying you don't have the capability for the Focom to query something, which is odd. You should be able to go, that's an odd one. I don't know why.
It is. That's why I'm getting back to this in the beginning. What the rationale for this is. And it's really where you have a divided organization, so you don't have an integration between the organization managing the clusters and the organization managing the network functions.
All right. So, but what I would do is this, right? For ORAN, right? I think what would be of interest is talk to Alexis and Bala, right? About what information you will need, the Focom, will need about clusters. Okay. And I think you have it documented, right? And they'll make sure that that's available to you on the IMS, right? But I do think that, and then ask them if they will need to perform this procedure as a sub procedure for their create cluster, if it's an FEO enabled, right? I think those are the two outstanding pieces on this one. But I don't know, Robbie, did you have comment?
Are there any other hands raised? I can't see them.
No. My only comment was to kind of align it with the architecture that we have, the NFO ORAN integration, because as such, we don't have anything like cluster registration service or registration job as part of the NFO platform too, right? I mean,
this is new.
Yeah. So exactly. So because generally when we have those things, we kind of, even in the Nephew integration architecture, we kind of highlighted it as, outside the Nephew platform components and so on. So it'll be good to kind of just align it so that, it doesn't confuse, when people look at it and so on. Yeah. That was my only comment. Yeah. Thank you.
I still think it was an interesting. I mean, there is. I think we understand where you come from, Tim. There is a opening in the ORAN architecture to have a IMS that doesn't actually do anything to the clusters, a no cloud instance.
Yeah, well, yeah, I could have a pre-built cloud, right, at Genesis. I could just build it all, and it all gets reported back up through the inventory. So FOCOM has the inventory of that, or can query that anytime they want, right? Because the authoritative source is the IMS of the O cloud that it provides the management services for, right? So there is that capability, which is kind of what threw me a little bit off, was that said, you're telling me that the cloud that you're providing to isn't the authoritative source of the clusters that's already created on it? So if I go to a Google Cloud Platform, for example, right? I go our Amazon Web Service, right? I go ask those services for what's there. I don't tell them to register it, right?
No. But if I build a system, well, I could argue that I should do the same. If I build a system that's independent of them, I need to get the information somehow.
You mean if you're building some private cloud? You're talking about building a private cloud, right? That you're saying that private cloud that you built doesn't have a service, an infrastructure service, is what you're saying. So
I don't believe we have any O2MS implementation at this point because we don't have a solid interface yet. So
yeah. But yes, that's right. But I'm saying but saying.
But it's different, right? It's different. So yeah. I can understand your point of view where I need to think about that a little bit.
Inventory notification and querying to the authoritative source, right? Is the trick, right? And then asking the authoritative source to create some infrastructure. And I just don't know what if you do those three things to any cloud, I don't care. Then those are the three different separate actions. I don't know what a register does. So, and it is 11:03, guys. So we're 3 minutes.
Oh, sorry. Well, thank you for the time.
Yeah, no. So, but if again,
can we review it offline?
Yeah.
Can we review it offline? Actually, that would be better because
the link is there. And good comments and feedback.
Yeah. So guys, review it offline. Again, Anders, do me a favor and make sure you circle this around with Alexis and Abala, because they're doing the crate cluster. So I want to make sure that they understand what they have and if you have any support that's needed. So this thing goes forward. Okay. All right, guys. So that's it. We're going to meet again next week on the 14th. With any luck, we'll finally get those crate clusters in. The
next meeting is Valentine's Day.
Hey, there you go. I've been married 40 years. So.
We are all. Don't worry. I'm just reminding you that, guys, be sure that we don't extend the meeting like this. That's an important day for all of us.
Oh, true for India. That's right. You're absolutely correct. Okay, guys. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.